This is part 10 in the video series Foundations of Literary Study, and the topic of this video is ideas and themes. So, to explore a writer's ideas, we have to look beyond plot, beyond structure, beyond character, setting, and figurative language. We can't really get to ideas by describing or summarizing the text or by identifying its subject matter. Rather than asking ourselves what happens in the text or what it's about, we have to ask broader sorts of questions. What does the writer conclude about society, about government, about family, or about poverty and wealth, love and loss, virtue and vice, about God, language, or nature? In short, what does the writer seem to value or care about? What truth does he hope to convey to the reader? And if that idea is persistent, if it recurs throughout the text, we may then identify it as a theme. So some literary genres and forms are more transparent about their ideas than others. Didactic literature, or literature that's where the intent is to instruct the reader, for example, requires ideas to be clearly presented in order to be more effectively instruct or persuade the reader. Allegory, satire, and epigram are common didactic modes, while other genres and forms, like realist fiction, for instance, may be less explicit. An intrusive third-person narrator or speaker in a lyric poem may make it easier to recognize ideas, but one should always remember to be wary of such voices, which are sometimes unreliable and may not really represent the beliefs and values of the writer. So finally, one should be alert to discrepancies and ambiguities in the text, areas where a writer's beliefs and values seem contested or strained, and pay close attention to how the writer avoids or navigates through those challenges, or if indeed he's even conscious of them. I find those moments of tension particularly interesting. So, looking then at Macbeth, there are so many themes. Some of them we've touched on in previous videos: guilt, political violence, sleep, for example. But the one I'm going to focus on is kingship here. And for this, I chose Act 4, Scene 3, lines 140 to 159. And this is discussing something called the King's Evil, which was a horrible disease of the lymphatic system that was quite common at this time. There are no fewer than 4 kings mentioned in Macbeth, 3 of whom appear on stage. There's King Duncan, of course, who's murdered and then succeeded by Macbeth, who becomes king. And then Malcolm, Duncan's son, who is crowned king in the denouement as Macbeth's head is hoisted in the air on a pole. But there's also a 4th king. He doesn't appear on stage, but he is mentioned, and it's Edward the Confessor, who's king of England in the 11th century. And he actually died right before the Norman conquest in 1066. In this scene, Macduff and Malcolm are in England, and they're waiting for an audience with the king, that is with Edward. They're there to get military support to take down Macbeth, and they're going to get it. But much of this scene is a long conversation between Malcolm and Macduff, in which Malcolm goes to really elaborate lengths to test Macduff's loyalty to him. And at the end of it, which is the lines here, there's this strange moment where a doctor enters to explain the king's delay in granting their audience. And I'll just read these lines. There aren't that many of them. So Malcolm says, "Comes the king forth, I pray you?" And the doctor says, "Aye, sir, there are a crew of wretched souls that stay his cure. Their malady convinces the great essay of art. But at his touch, such sanctity hath heaven given his hand, they presently amend." So in other words, he cures them. And Malcolm says, "I thank you, doctor." And Macduff says, what's the disease he means? And Malcolm says, "'Tis called the evil, a most miraculous work in this good king, which often since my here remain in England I have seen him do. How he solicits heaven, himself best knows. But strangely visited people, all swollen and ulcerous, pitiful to the eye, the mere despair of surgery he cures, hanging a gold stamp about their necks, put on with holy prayers, and to spoken to the succeeding royalty he leaves the healing benediction. With this strange virtue he hath a heavenly gift of prophecy, and sundry blessings hang about his throne that speak him full of grace." And that's the end of the scene. Then Ross comes in, and the bearer of bad news for Macduff. But one of the themes of the play that's revealed here is the question of effective rule. What makes a good king? What are the signs of a thriving, healthy monarchy? We certainly get the negative example, of course, in Macbeth, a bloodthirsty tyrant. His hands are polluted with blood. His name, Malcolm says earlier in this scene, blisters the tongue. But in this reference to Edward the Confessor's healing powers, which has little dramatic value, we don't even see the king on stage, and it's completely irrelevant to the plot of the play. Shakespeare's purpose seems to be to present the idea of an effective king as one who has the sanction not only of his people, but of God, and that sanction is evidenced by divine powers bestowed upon the king. So the ability to cure disease by merely touching his subjects, for example. One wonders if Shakespeare himself subscribed to this idea, or if he included it merely to flatter his patron, King James I, who believed in witchcraft, so much so that he wrote a treatise on the subject. And he also believed in the divine right of kings, the idea that his right to rule was ultimately derived from God, from divine authority, and therefore that made him accountable only to God. And this would become a major problem for James's son Charles I, who would get his head chopped off in the English Civil Wars. So some questions for you to think about. What ideas or themes can you find in Poe's The Raven and Keats's Ode to a Nightingale? What truths emerge from the speaker's interactions with birds? Can you identify areas where their beliefs and values falter a little bit? And to what extent is that tension acknowledged and resolved? And that concludes this video on ideas and themes.